From North Mississippi Regional Park, site of Minneapolis' Arbor Day 2002, it's On Cue, the program that explores our urban environments. Phill Lindsay's guests include Marylynn Pulscher, talking about the value of parks and open spaces in the urban environment. Weiming Lu, sharing insights on planning and urban design. Hennepin County Commissioner Gail Dorfman, discussing the political side of working on the urban environment. Plus planners on the street, something about highways, and a few words from Barbara Flanagan. All this and a bit more on Cue, October 2002.
And welcome back. That's a great program the Neighborhood Environment Committee does with the blooming boulevards. So glad they do it. My first guest on this edition of On Cue is Marylynn Pulscher. She's got a great job. Marylynn, nice to have you here.
Thanks.
You are the Environmental Education Coordinator for the Minneapolis Park System.
Yep.
What is that?
Well, essentially I supervise 4 main programs. One is Mill Ruins Park. If anybody's been down there at the foot of the Stone Arch Bridge, we run historical walking tours, simulated archaeological digs, and it's a blast. I highly recommend it. We also run Eloise Butler Wildflower Garden, which is the oldest public wildflower garden in the United States, and that's open till October 15th, so come by soon.
Yes.
We also run the new North Mississippi Interpretive Center, which is just down the path from this picnic shelter.
Which is a lovely facility just in and of itself.
Right.
Lots to learn there, and
it's gorgeous.
You haunt that space as well.
Yes, we do.
So you're kind of north side, south side, all around the town.
We do it all, and we also do the Neighborhood Naturalist Program, which is a mobile environmental education program where the naturalists go to the 50 full-time recreation centers that we have in the city, and they bring the nature center to the kids, so to speak.
Now you said some things I didn't know. 50 centers?
Yeah, we have 50 full-time recreation centers.
I see what you're saying. And in each of them?
Each of them.
You have these programs.
Right.
Wow.
And we serve kids up through age 12.
That's great. How long has the position that you have existed with the Minneapolis system?
Oh, I think probably like 5 or 6 years. It had a little different twist earlier on, but this one is this one's a little more fun, I think, than the previous title.
Oh, okay.
So.
Man, this isn't the first thing you've done with the parks. You were a planner.
Right. Previous to this, I worked in park planning for 5 years, and before that, when I was in college, I worked in recreation. So I've seen a lot of aspects, and maybe next I'll take on forestry. I don't know.
All right. So from the smaller shrubs all the way up to the canopy there.
Yeah, exactly.
So you started out in recreation. How did you kind of move towards environmental education?
I just really love the great outdoors, so to speak, and I really think having public access to parks and making it accessible for everyone is really important. Recreation is great. I love youth sports. I did all of that, but there's also that you need to connect with nature and know that nature is found in your own backyard, in your local park, and not just out in the regional park system or way out in the state parks or at Glacier National. So kind of progress that way.
You raised an issue I'd like to talk about a little bit. As you go further out into, the hinterlands, you get up to the boundary waters, you get up to the great national and state forests, people, I think, expect to see a lot of nature and interpretive things. Can you describe a little bit about the difference between an urban setting for a park and open space? What are some of the special challenges? What do you have to deal with that, say, Voyagers doesn't, or even the county?
Well, we deal with intensity of use. The Minneapolis Park System serves 15 million people in a given year. We're the second highest number of users after the Mall of America in the state of Minnesota. So we have a huge user group that's here all of the time. So people literally love things to death. We also have the challenge that we don't have bears, or we don't have some of the more...
That's a challenge that you don't?
Well, it's a little bit... We don't have the exotic stuff that some of the kids that live in the city think they're going to see.
Okay.
So for them, it's getting them excited about... Sometimes if you're in the little local park, it's, hey, look at the spiders. When you come out to a regional park, you can show them the things you would find in your own backyard, like a raccoon or gray squirrels. Why are chickadees really so neat?
Yeah.
And so for us, it's interpreting what's around you and how you and your own actions in your own backyard actually impact
Okay.
the world around you.
So a lot of specifics.
Right.
And speaking of specifics, here we are at North Mississippi Regional Park.
Yeah.
There's some partnerships with this facility here. Can you talk about
Sure
that?
thing. The park is about 80 acres, and the park board's been, running this now probably since the 40s when they started acquiring property related to Shingle Creek in North Mississippi. And in the last few years, they developed a master plan with the neighborhood, and the first step was this picnic shelter, the playground that's here. And then last year, or the year before, we went into partnership with Three Rivers Park District, which was formerly known as Hennepin Parks. And together, we are running the new North Mississippi Interpretive Center. So
okay, so that's a great partnership.
Right, and it's a new partnership. We've never done anything with them before. And so we're programming the building together, and so far so good. And everybody is definitely invited to come out and check it out. We have permanent displays in there that focus on the Mississippi and people and their connections to the river.
And a good portion of that 15 million people probably come up here.
Well, yeah. This is kind of like the Minnehaha Falls of the North Side. So
that's a wonderful analogy. Marylynn, we have just a minute left. Can you talk about any of the specifics of this park in terms of the environment? Anything people would encounter here that they might not anywhere else?
Well, I think one, you've got great access to the Mississippi River. It's very easy to get to the shoreline. There's a boat launch down at the south end of the park. We're just starting a prairie restoration, 16 acres at the south end of the park. So if you come now, you can see the before and then the after. And then next year, if you come out, we're developing prairie potholes for stormwater cleanup and whatnot. That'll be between this picnic shelter and the interpretive center. So, and the bird watching is phenomenal. Scarlet tanagers, you name it, we've got it.
You just named one of my favorites. That's great.
They're gorgeous.
So there's a lot of seasonal activity here.
And come back for snowshoeing in the winter. So we're going to try that too. Maybe a little canoeing even.
On the river?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah, it is.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Nice to have you on the show.
Thanks.
All right. Well, we'll be back in a moment with our next guest, Weiming Lu, and after that, of course, we've got Hennepin County Commissioner Gail Dorfman. But first, we've got our question of the show, why? We'll be right back.
Well, first of all the freeways are not below grade in Minneapolis, but assuming we use that as a premise, that there's several good reasons why they are below grade. One is, of course, there's drainage issues. You have to build a sewer collection system, and since you have to dig a hole anyway, you might as well have it below grade. There's a lot of environmental issues related to noise, certainly. Below grade, the noise is mitigated. And certainly the visual pollution aspect of it also, that you don't see those vehicles like you do on, of course, several sections of above-grade freeways that come into Minneapolis, like 394 and 94. Probably one of the bigger reasons is cost. If you have to build structures to elevate the freeway, there's more cost involved. If you can use the natural ground and support your structures, your pavements, etc., your costs are much reduced. So as most transportation-related issues, it's not just one particular element that we use for determining the alignments, both vertical and horizontal, of a freeway section. But those are some of the major reasons why most of the freeways are underground here in the metropolitan area.
Well, many people have often just enjoyed the fact that our interstates are below grade throughout most of the Twin Cities, and we just thought it might be interesting to talk to somebody who maybe knew why. My next guest is a gentleman who has had experience in both Minneapolis and St. Paul, and indeed around the country and to some extent around the world. Weiming Lu, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Yeah, my pleasure, Phil.
CUE, the Minneapolis Committee on Urban Environment, couldn't have grown to what it is today without your early efforts, and that is part of your background, isn't it?
Well, I was privileged to serve when the first CUE was first established.
And you were at the time working with the Minneapolis Planning Department.
Yes, I was. Right. And at that time, of course, under Mayor Arthur Neflin, and there's some really wonderful leaders in the city. And
on other occasions, you've told a wonderful story about the quantity, the volume of community and neighborhood meetings you would attend in those days. This is what, the late 60s, early 70s?
Yeah, that's correct. And I actually, take, for example, I work in the Southeast. I was the neighborhood planner there. And that, as you know, has always been one of the most active neighborhoods in the city. Something like 30 different organizations.
Now this kind of greater Dinkytown, as it were.
Dinkytown all the way to Hennepin Avenue and all of that. And at that time, and I remember in 3 years, we had something like 500 meetings and so many church and school and people's basement. I've been there.
All the it sounds like you paid your dues in those days.
Well, I was educated well.
Yeah.
And it was really, and I really was felt very good about those citizen participation, the kind of leaderships, and like Dave Preuss and Bob McGregor, Norma Olsen, just to name a few.
Yes. Well, and since then you've gone on. I know that you've taken your thoughts and your expertise to various places around the world. Currently, you head up the Lowertown Redevelopment Corporation. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and what its charge is?
Actually, that is a creation of the McKnight Foundation, basically to help the city to create public-private partnership to preserve this heritage of St. Paul and try to find new future. So we start with empty warehouse and parking lot, and today we have attracted more than $500 million investment there, and we're building what we call an urban village, and with residents, with artists, with high-tech peoples and variety of things. So it is a new community now.
Well, I helped start a nonprofit arts organization in Lowertown some 20 plus years ago, and to have watched the changes, the growth, the vitality that you've helped put together there, I think deserves congratulations.
Well, thank you. A lot of people work together. Certainly these things always take so many people, leadership, resources, and otherwise this can never happen. But it was a exciting, it has been a continued kind of challenge as well, and we're looking at future now, and looks at what we call the River Garden Plan, and we also have worked with the East Side, created Lower Phelan, a natural sanctuary, and named after Bruce Vento, and that is well along us also.
A real champion of the environment.
Absolutely,
Congressman
and we
Vento.
think that's very appropriate to do that. So we are excited about the future, and it demonstrates, how people work together can achieve something.
Well, you've mentioned the future, and that's a good key here. What, in general, are some of the issues facing people that are working on the urban environment or doing urban design? What are some of the major challenges today that you need to anticipate and work on?
I think the challenge, I see it number way. One is to really make sure that you are really working for people. You're empowering people. You don't say it only. You don't just say I'm for citizen participation, but in the next time you don't include them in it. And you need to make sure you kind of involve with them. So empower people is very important to me. I think creativity is also important. In the end, you need to think about a different future, to think about what can be done in today's world. Global economies, the kind of fast-moving society and well-connected. How do we build an entirely new city, fit this new era? I think on the other hand, that there is also danger to wipe out all the past, and there's a need to really preserving the heritage, and to need to do something really is authentic, not just the phony kind of Disney World types of things. And I think that we need to discover one's own history and heritage and culture, and in order to really look at the future and build something the new and old can fit together. So I think there's this kind of a continued challenge. I think another one I think is very important to me is to use the resources effectively, and this goes into the energy conservation, the use of city money or public money. I see sometimes too much waste, and that in Lowertown we have used the McKnight funding and leveraging 20 times our money to achieve these things.
And some of these other sources would include the private sector,
private sources, every
municipal
sources we can count and can bring it in, and that is all important. So I think one thing, the discipline, the knowledge, and the toughness of negotiation, all of these come into the picture. And so, you know, participation, authenticity, continuity, innovations, everything sort of come together to achieve something that's really significant. And for Minneapolis, I mean, Minneapolis has such a strong heritage in open space, in park.
This is lovely,
in
isn't
history,
it? Yeah.
all of these. And I frankly think that more could be done, more should be done.
Mm-hmm. Well, you indicate the Mississippi River here, which literally links both the cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul. Could you talk a little bit about the commonalities of the two inner cities, and by that I mean St. Paul and Minneapolis, versus what often is characterized as the differences and the competitive distance between them?
Well, actually, we really should talk about competitive in the world, not just competitive between the cities. How do we together compete against the world? And my works extend to the whole world, and I don't my feeling is that in order to be, you know, competitive globally, you really need to work together. There's no, on the other hand, there's no problems of sort of respecting each other's the difference and creating all of these, but together there's so many areas of common interest, and they really need to work together.
Very good. Weiming Lu, we're just out of time. Thank you very much for sharing a few of your good thoughts.
Yes, very fast, very
it goes
happy.
Quickly.
I need
nice
to
to have
speak
you
very
here.
faster, much
Very
faster.
good. Hold on just a second.
Yeah.
We'll be back with our next guest, Hennepin County Commissioner Gail Dorfman, who'll be talking about the political dimension of working with the urban environment. But first, a few words from one of last year's Q Award jurors. Stay tuned.
The origins of Q, this is interesting. Lady Bird Johnson, who's First Lady, was very interested in the fact that billboards were blighting the highways, and the sides of the highways were terrible and so forth. And so she started a campaign, and this kind of inspired Mayor Arthur Naftalin, who got together what he called a beautification committee, because there were suddenly beautification committees all over the country. And it was an interesting group of civic leaders that included Ralph Rapson, the architect, the late Walter Robinson, who at that point was president of the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, Norma Olson, who had been in the fight to try to get the Highway 94 sort of in good shape. I mean, she was just an incredible worker and just a lovely lady. There were others, and he said, you know, how about this? And they all seemed to go for it. And so they organized, and this was probably, you know, 5 years or so before they started giving out the awards.
And we're back. Once again, want to thank Barbara Flanagan for her help, not only as a Q juror last year, but her years and years of support and advocacy for Q. She's been a great booster of Q, and it's important to have someone like her in the media leading the charge. My next guest is Hennepin County Commissioner Gail Dorfman, another doughty supporter of Q, a member of Q. It's nice to have you on the show.
Thank you very much.
And you fill the chair that is designated from Hennepin County to serve on Q.
That's exactly right. I've been doing that about 6 to 8 months, and it's important that Hennepin County, I think, have a voice on the Q board.
Well, and that's one of the things that I most enjoy about your contribution is that your district encompasses both some of the central city, Minneapolis, but also part of the suburban west part of the metro area, St. Louis Park. Whence is your background, isn't that correct?
And, well, it's perfect. I think I'm really lucky, and I have, of course, the best district because of the mix.
Yeah.
And so it is both urban and suburban, although I think a lot of the first-ring suburban issues are really very similar to urban issues, and we're doing a lot of the same work in Minneapolis as we are doing in St. Louis Park. And it's interesting, and there's a lot of diversity of people and projects that are going on that make it a lot of fun.
When you help us keep in mind that there's a link, not just, as I like to say, from the inside out, But cities are connected one with the other. They're transition zones and they're necessary places you have to get from one place to the other. And I think that's what you bring to the table.
Well, I mean, if we look at our individual cities in the metropolitan area and in sort of a territorial way, we miss out on a lot of opportunity to do projects and promote our communities in healthy ways that clearly cross boundaries.
Well, that's right. And, my background's in the arts. And I always say, artists don't stop at a border.
No.
Audiences don't stop at a border. And so whether it's St. Louis Park, Minneapolis, or St. Paul, there's a lot of flow that goes back and forth.
And we spend a lot of time lately talking about what it means to create a sense of place in our communities. And that sense of place shouldn't be defined, however we define it, and we can talk about that some, it shouldn't be defined as stopping at borders. You really need continuity is also an important part of creating a sense of place.
Well, let's get to that in just a second. I want our viewers to be aware of part of your political background, because what I want to talk with you about is sort of that political dimension, that heavy lifting that goes with working with the urban environment. You are a former mayor of St. Louis Park.
Of St. Louis Park, and I served on the city council and have worked a lot in grassroots community organizations throughout all of my elective office term, and worked in Washington for some time in elective politics as well.
That's right. And so let's get right down to it in terms of the constituencies. Where do the ideas come from? Now, St. Louis Park is doing some fantastic things there along Excelsior Boulevard. Just using that as an example, where do some of those ideas bubble up from, or do they come from planning? From elected officials?
And it's an interesting thing because there's the Park Commons project that is currently under construction along Excelsior Boulevard is a big project. I mean, it is a $115 million project. And it would mean it would have never been successful if it had come, for example, from City Hall or a developer who had come in and said, I've got this great idea.
Yeah.
And even though it is now under construction, if it had come from on high saying this is what we want to do and we want to invest this much money and there needs to be a substantial public contribution, it never would have happened. It's happening now because it really grew from the grassroots. And I think when we look at creating this sense of place in our community, it has to bubble up from the grassroots. We really have to grow it from the ground up. Otherwise, even if it's a good project, it becomes controversial. You have people at planning and city council meetings saying, what are you trying to do? It needs to be carefully grown.
Right, and that's where
over
leadership
time.
Comes in, though, at that point.
There's a critical piece for leadership.
Yeah, you act as sort of the conduit then towards that public funding, towards development.
Well, and also just leading the conversation in some ways by saying, okay, we have an opportunity for redevelopment, and what are we seeking to achieve in sort of the big context that will create a healthy community? And it's not so much getting down to all the details about what kind of business do you want here, how many housing types do you want here, what should they look like? It's really about what does this community need? What, in a big picture context, should it look like? What connections should there be to other aspects of the community and to the surrounding community to make it successful? And I think leadership is basically beginning those conversations at a real conceptual stage, not at a detail stage, to talk about what the community wants and growing that over time.
And then figuring out how to hand off, once those values are shared, get the right people in there to implement it.
That's right.
Yeah.
But with grassroots participation at every single phase.
At each of those phases, all the way through.
I think so.
Let me throw this at you then. What's the hardest challenge? Where do the competing interests come in? What's the hardest part about taking a good idea and helping to shape it and then making it real? What's the hardest hurdle?
The hardest part from my perspective as the mayor was recognizing that not everything I wanted was going to be in the final product, and being willing to say, I don't have all the ideas, and city staff who have great expertise don't have all the ideas, and developers don't have all the best ideas, but that we really have to be open to hearing everybody who has an interest. And there were thousands of stakeholders. And so at some point you have to be willing to allow for some chaos during the process of development, and you have to be willing to say that there may be some ideas that come into play that are in the final product and project that I might not necessarily agree with, but it's keeping it open and trying to accommodate as many points of view as you can. And ultimately, that's what makes it successful in terms of fitting in with the community.
For those of our viewers that are familiar with that particular project, as large as it is, can you just give me a round number about a timeline from when the idea started percolating to, now the buildings are being built out?
Yeah.
How long a process is something like that?
I tend to be very process oriented, but I do think in something this big that you need to be, and there needs to be sort of a careful momentum that builds over time. So it started about 7 years ago, where the city, in a strategic visioning process that had nothing to do with that process, where grassroots individuals said we need a town center.
Okay.
So the idea came out of the community in the first place. But then there was lots of building with neighborhood charrettes where everybody threw their ideas on the table. And then individual task forces as we began to go from concept to an actual plan. And then continuing with all the detail work. And I think we tend to forget in creating this sort of sense of place and building a healthy community that the details matter. In the end. And so as you move along that, it gets more and more detailed to the kind of building materials you're going to use and the kind of landscaping you want to have, and incorporating public art and making sure you have public spaces as well as private spaces that everybody can access.
So there are a lot of the details, and they all need to be attended to.
Lots of details.
Gail, we're just out of time. Thank you for just a précis over doing the urban design in the political context.
Thanks for having me today. It's a beautiful park.
Isn't it great to be here?
Great place to be.
You bet. Well, I'll be back to wrap up the show in just a moment, but first, we sent our camera crew out to talk with some planners on the street. Stay tuned.
I guess as a planner, the thing that's probably the most on my mind is some of the topics that we talk about in terms of getting people to accept affordable housing that's more dense, and how you go about doing that, and how to work with developers in terms of designing affordable housing that actually looks like something that people would want to live in or be proud to live in.
As a planner with the city of Minneapolis, I think my basic focus would be on affordable housing, trying to help those initiatives that the city is trying to put in place.
And Osseo itself is going through redevelopment processes and trying to maintain its small town character. At the same time, they're taking their brunt of the growth in the region and working with regional projects such as the Northwest Corridor, which is County Road 81, and some implementation of a bus line, a rapid bus transit system.
My name is Margaret Dykes. I'm with the City of Apple Valley Planning Department, and the issue that a lot of suburban communities are dealing with the most at this point, I believe, is affordable housing and getting affordable housing to people that are coming out to the suburbs.
And my biggest goal is just to make sure that our next generations into the future have a great place to live, to work, to play, and just take care of their kids and the future generations.
Hi, I'm Tom Terry with the City of Norwood Young America. Like most smaller communities at the fringe of the metropolitan area, our main issue is dealing with the growth that we're seeing as part of the metropolitan area. In addition to that, one of the things and one of the challenges as a planning professional is educating the public on the need for planning in order to deal with that growth.
So really, kind of the key, what we're trying to do is manage growth, but also protect the environment at the same time.
Hi, my name's Rebecca. I'm a planner with the City of Plymouth. One of the things I've been learning at the planning conference today, and something that's on my mind as important in the metro area, is the importance of transit and providing pedestrian and bicycling connections for the area so that we don't have to rely on our cars so much.
And we're back. We want to thank Pat Morris of the Minnesota chapter of the American Planners Association for arranging us to get in and talk with some of those planners about what's on their minds these days. And we're gearing up for the next edition of On Cue. We're going to kind of take a look at some of the hands-on activities that Q is doing these days. So stay tuned for that next month. And I also want to point out the new Q newsletter that's being published quarterly. In it, you can find out about what's going on with Q and find out some ways that you could maybe get involved as well. If you want to find out about this newsletter or Q in general, call the Q number 612-673-3014. I'm your host, Phill Lindsay. We'll look forward to seeing you on the next edition of On Q. It's good to be here.